of you that are here, this is going to be conversational. So as you hear things, note them, because we're going to ask you to just weigh in, okay?
Absolutely.
All right, great.
Okay. Ready? Okay. Let's go. Good morning. Thank you for joining us in person and virtually. Today we're going to have a discussion focused on rebuilding communities for the long haul. I'm happy to be joined by Angela Walker, President and CEO of the United Way Worldwide, and Puneet Ranjan, Global CEO Emeritus of Deloitte. And I'm Kimberly Johnson, Deputy Chief News Editor at the Wall Street Journal. I want to remind everyone sharing details about this session on social media to do so, and to use the hashtags WEF23 and United Way.
Hashtag United Way.
Hashtag United Way. So we're going to jump right into it. There's a lot to discuss. There's so many things going on. This is one of the first sessions today at WEF. So, you know, by many perspectives, we're living in a time of consistent threats, and some might even say crises. We have economic uncertainty, water shortages, food and energy insecurity, and devastating natural disasters. Therefore, the need to rebuild and support our communities at the local, regional, and even the national level is more important than ever. However, what kind of playbook do we need for that? Do we need a new playbook? Do we need to build on an existing playbook? And how do we as leaders work to bring companies, government, and civil society together to develop long-lasting solutions? So with that, I want to open it with Angela to talk a little bit about what you're doing and seeing with the United Way.
So thank you all for being here. I'm Angela Williams, President and CEO of United Way Worldwide. Just to start with, we are an ecosystem of 1,100 local United Ways operating in communities in 37 countries. So when we think about this notion of community and crisis and the work that we do, it falls really under three broad umbrellas: health, education, and economic mobility. But we also respond with respect to disaster and also the environment. So what we see on the ground is, as neighbors, as trusted advisors, the need to connect with individuals, families in community. And what that requires is not only us creating this United Way table for individuals to have a stake in what's going on with respect to solutions in their communities, but we also, as Kimberly mentioned, we have relationships with government entities. We have 45,000 corporate partners. But one of the things that we're really clear about at United Way is that it's not just one table or your table or my table. I say in this new era that we find ourselves in, we are at a new table. And I also, and I'll stop here, want to challenge us to think about not going back to the new normal, which everybody said during COVID, but really to think about what how we define normal. And I don't want to go back to where we were pre-COVID, because there were a lot of disparities that still exist and the gaps are wider. But we have an opportunity at this moment in time to really be innovative, to do some new things, and to make lives better for people in community.
So you said new era. I just want to go back to that, and not the new normal. That's different. We're past talking about the pandemic. How do you define new era? What's sort of the flip there for you?
So when I think about the new era now and where we find ourselves, and I would love to ask the audience at some point in time if you have a different view, but from my perspective, life changed after COVID. People don't want to work in the same way that they used to work. So we're having a lot of conversations about that, employers are. Secondly, people are saying using technology differently and connecting differently with individuals. Third, when I think about this new era, I think of lightning speed. Everything is happening so quickly. And then the fourth thing I would say is we're talking about crisis, but I wonder if even crises have changed, or are we really actually just becoming more aware on a very local, hyper-local level, as well as on a country, region, or global level when it comes to crisis? But things have changed, and we're not going back. We're going forward, and we're going forward at a very, very fast rate of speed.
Okay. Puneet, you were head of Deloitte for about 7 years, and it's a company many or associate with services, consulting, technology, and audit work. Can you give us your view about how Deloitte comes into this work and working in local and regional communities?
It's great to be here. It's great to be here with you and Angela. The work that Angela and the United Way does is absolutely exceptional. If you talk about a community-based organization, United Way is it. So how's that, Angela?
I love it, and the check is in the mail.
Yeah. But to your question, you asked, Angela, about the new normal. Business can't thrive if our communities don't thrive. One of the things that COVID brought into great relief was that one point, is that we can't thrive as Deloitte if our local communities are not thriving. The second point that COVID brought into great relief was the fact that these problems, these issues that you talked about, can't be addressed by government alone, can't be addressed by NGOs alone. They have to be addressed by business, NGOs, and government together. The last point, this is not altruistic. I don't do this out of the goodness of my heart. I have 400,000, or I used to when I was CEO. I retired December 31st. I've got to be clear about that. But Deloitte has 400,000 professionals in 150 countries. 80% of them are millennials and Gen Zs. When we survey them and we ask them what matters to them, you know what their number one point is? What does Deloitte do beyond its core profit motive? How is Deloitte addressing or helping to address some of these issues? So if I want to hire the very best individuals, if I want to retain the very best individuals, I must have a credible response. And that's why Deloitte gives 3% of our net income back into the communities that we live and work in. $1.7 billion over the last 5 years or so. 1.7 billion. Not out of altruistic reasons, but because it is good business.
Can you give us an example of what that looks like? I think many people associate giving and giving pledges and volunteerism, but what you're doing, what Deloitte is doing is beyond that. Can you give us an example?
Well, one great example is our work with United Way. In every community that they are involved in, Deloitte is there. That may be a stretch. I would say in most communities, in many communities. But you know what? The other thing that we realized very quickly is that we can certainly give money. But what is most important to us and our most coveted asset is our people. Getting our people involved in their local communities is not only a great retention strategy, but it gives back to the communities that they live and work in. So I'll give you an example. We signed up in 2017 to a commitment called World Class. One of the great assets that Deloitte has is wonderful people, and through education, changing the lives of individuals. We said we will impact 100 million underprivileged people, but we did that community by community. In India, where 175 women and girls are uneducated, and therefore they can't take advantage of what is happening in India, we've committed to changing the lives of 50 million women and girls. In China, it is the left behind children. In the United States, my 82-year-old mother still lives in India. When we had the COVID wave, Delta hit India with devastating impact. My mother got COVID, 82 years old, I couldn't travel, and that spurred some action on our part. And we have 100,000 professionals in India. We collaborated with the government to come up with a digital response to take care of 90 to 95% of patients at home. So my mother, as an example, could use WhatsApp to communicate with a centralized set of doctors in terms of what her blood oxygen level was, what her temperature was, and it enabled Deloitte, working with the government of India and working with the local hospitals and NGOs, came up with a response where 95% of patients were treated at home. Mortality rates went down 50%. Now, that is a very specific example of a problem that was hitting a community and how we leveraged the capabilities that we had, digital capabilities, the ability to come up with a virtual response through the medical center, reduce the impact on hospitals, and impact our local communities, including my mom.
Right. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just want to share an example that's US-based that United Way does. There is a number that people can dial if they're in need. It's 211. And I think that's one of the greatest assets that we have. We have call centers all over the country in the United States. We take in about 21 million calls a year. So on a daily basis, our call operators around the country know what issues are affecting a community and can actually pinpoint. So it's like this, a bellwether or canary in the mine shaft. As calls start increasing, and we know what is happening, and we can work with government and others to find solutions. In April of this year, we saw a 40% uptick in our calls for three things. People, due to inflation, could not afford food, they could not afford to pay their utility bills, and they could not afford rent. What we also see with this number 211 is an opportunity for the federal government to be able to have access, as well as other entities, to understand what can we do and how can we solve for problems that are happening and get in front of them, as opposed to allowing things to happen and no one knows about it and no one acts. So that's an example of how we work in the United States. I'll give you another example. I was most recently visiting our United Ways in both Ghana and Nigeria. And in Ghana, right outside of Accra, about an hour, there's Kwamoso, which is a village. And the village chief invited United Way in to create an economic empowerment zone for the women and girls. And the reason the chief gave us the land is he said, other NGOs, they come in, they drop off things, and they leave. But you, United Way, your people come back weekly, and you stay, and you become a part of the village. So with just $14,000, and that was a corporation that gave us the money, $14,000, we were able to create a bakery business, a bead making business, and a soap manufacturing business. And for the young girls, I met one who was 16, pregnant, had a baby, and she said when she got pregnant, her dreams of going to college were completely dashed. And she was just crying because she said, now I have to do something to support myself and my baby. And you could also see the shame that was on her. But that's the kind of thing where we can work together. And I will tell you, when I was there with the chief, he asked me, could I come back to the village and he would give me land to build a drug rehabilitation center. Now this is a village where it's just red dirt, you know, not, there may have been there was not much indoor plumbing, I'll just put it that way. And yet he wanted us to build a drug rehabilitation center. He said, the young men in the village are strung out on drugs, and this is affecting our generations to come and our families currently. Can you help us do something? So again, when we, United Way and our staff, we live in community, we talk to people, we form relationships, we're able to get the favor and the trust to be able to help people and for them to help in coming up with the solutions.
So both of you have a fantastic global view, and you outline at least 3 issues here. I'm curious to know, in your mind, as you come to the forum this week, what is the most acute or pressing issue you feel your communities are challenged by?
So I'll start with, I'll go back to the 3 broad areas that I mentioned, and really five, but health, education, economic mobility. And then we respond in terms of disaster relief and some environmental work and climate as well. But within each of those buckets, you have to go to the specific community. And when I say community, I'm talking about neighborhood. I'm not talking about an entire city. I'm talking about a neighborhood in a city, because there are microcosms. And within, say, I'm from Chicago, and so within one block in Old Town are the projects. And that's a set of gangs that are operating in those projects, and they have specific needs.
Assisted housing.
Yeah, assisted housing, yes. Thank
Subsidized
you for that.
housing.
Subsidized housing, yes.
Subsidized housing.
And then across the street, you have yet another set of individuals, but just across the street, two different sets of needs, and the need to engage the community and involve them. So what we're seeing, I would say, actually, the broader category is trauma. And trauma comes in many forms. Trauma could come from lack of access to education. Trauma could come from lack of access to health care. Trauma could come from not being able to have a job and make a living wage. Or trauma could come from disaster. And so whatever form the trauma comes to an individual, that's where, again, we have that collective need. And what I think companies need to always understand is their employees are members of the community. And so that's why companies have to care about the communities that their employees live in, what's going on in those communities, because people come to work with their issues. They don't check them at the front door or when they swipe in. Those go into who we are as individuals, and yes, we need the profit margin that companies need to think about, but what we're talking about is human beings and that human attachment and that recognition that we need to meet people where they are, and I would also then go into saying creating equity within all situations, within all venues.
So if I could add to what Angela did a very nice job. I think the community by community, the specific issues might vary, but there are a couple of things that are that Angela said that I want to highlight. One, I said this in my opening: business cannot succeed if the communities are not successful. Right. And our employees or our partners are members of that community. Whether they're impacted directly or not, they see what is happening in that community. Right. So it's really important for business to realize that, because it impacts their ability to actually do a good job in what their core purpose is. Right. Those are 2 points that I want to highlight. But I think you asked about what we should be discussing at the World Economic Forum. I think inequality or the fact that there isn't equity is a big deal. And Angela talked about health, income. I read a piece early this morning as I was preparing for my day. I'm from India, as I said. 4% of Indians control 40% of the wealth in India. 50%, the bottom 50% of Indians control 3%. That is not a sustainable model. It's not a fair model. It's not a sustainable model. We need to absolutely address that.
Do we need an entirely new playbook to address that?
Well, I think we're alluding to that, and that is, it isn't and I wanted to highlight climate as well. Climate is a very big deal, and it's going to impact the lower strata of society more so than it will impact people like Angela and myself. We all flew in here, not the best thing to do for climate, but that is something that we need to address collectively. But to the playbook point, I think we're saying that it isn't up to one entity, government. There isn't enough money within governments to address the issues that we confront. Right. NGOs can't do that. Angela can't do that by themselves. It is an ecosystem of government, NGOs, and business. It is in business interest to do it. One last plug, and this is shameless. In the last 7.5 years, I told you we give 3% of our net income. Michelle Palmerly, one of my partners, and Divyesh is sitting here. We've had the best 7 years in our bottom line, in our history. We've nearly doubled the firm on the top line and the bottom line in the last 8 years. Now, I can't draw a causal link, but I can, through anecdotes, be able to tell you that there is a correlation between what we do in our communities, how we live our purpose, and how we communicate to our 400,000 professionals, and the bottom line result.
How do you influence other business leaders to take the same approach?
Well, me talking about it. But I also am quick to add that we're a private enterprise. And unlike a public company CEO, I don't have the same pressure of delivering a quarterly result. Now, they elect me, or they used to elect me before I retired, and they can kick me out after 4 years, but I don't have the same quarterly, so we can make bets that are longer term. But I think we're now converts within our firm that to do right by our communities is good for our employees, raises their morale, and it leads to a better bottom line result.
Can I just jump in and give you another example that is recent? When we talk about just coming off of the pandemic and vaccines, we saw the pharma companies that created the vaccines, and then we needed to logistically get those shots into arms. But what we also saw were in some countries of the globe, they weren't getting access to the vaccines. And then, for example, in the US, individuals had access to the vaccine, but didn't want to take advantage of it, either for logistical reasons or the thought that there's something wrong with the vaccine, or listening to false facts, or reading things on the internet. And so where partners like pharma companies and companies like Deloitte and NGOs, where we were in communities and are in communities and know people, we can educate them. And so I had the opportunity to do some work right in Clarkston, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta, where I think about 26 languages are spoken in this one zip code. But what my suggestion was, let's do a back to school event, but let's bring the kids in, but let's have healthcare workers that speak the language and look like the people in the community. And so when you have pharma that's manufacturing drugs, but then you have the individual that's supposed to be the recipient, that's where NGOs come in as that bridge, because it takes the partnership. Government couldn't do it. Ads on TV couldn't necessarily do it. We always had to have that one-on-one human connection. And so we can never, ever undervalue the power of human connection. And that includes the employees of publicly held companies or privately held companies. That human connection is key.
Right. We're going to open it up for questions in a moment. And so I guess my question for both of you, and I'm sure you've been in these rooms, is when you bring all the stakeholders to the table, most of the time people have different interests. So how do you try to seek cooperation and some common ground?
I'll start. Well, I think it starts with what's the issue at hand. And one of the things that I've found is that, yes, there are always political interests, there are always community interests, et cetera. But for us at United Way, what we tend to do is to be able to be that convener and say, here's the issue on the table. Now, how can we have conversations and creatively and innovatively create the solutions for these problems? I will give you just one quick example. Again, this is a US-based example in the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area. There was, in the early 1900s, what was called the Black Wall Street. And there was a moment when the government decided to build a highway through Black Wall Street, which meant all of the black-owned banks, the black doctors, the black businesses were destroyed. So we, United Way now, and the community was called Haiti, named after Haiti, but they pronounce it Haiti. So what we are doing now is convening conversations with those individuals that were displaced, and they are now sons and daughters, and they're still feeling the trauma. We're bringing in government officials to say, how can we now, that highway is not going to move, but how do we re-engage the Black community to be able to generate wealth, to be able to be entrepreneurs, to engage in economic mobility? How do we rebuild that community? And then we have nonprofits. We have one that we partner with that she builds affordable housing. So we work with her and fund her project to build affordable housing. So again, it's multi-layered, multi-dimensional, but coming to the table, understanding we all have different perspectives, but we still need to address the pressing issue at that moment.
Human beings want to do good. I mean, I think most of us at our core want to do right and want to do good. But to actually have something that sustains over time, you have to appeal to the self-interest of individuals. So I've been using Deloitte as an example. We have 15,000 partners globally that own the firms. And so you have to appeal to those 15,000 partners that giving 3% of their net income back into their communities is actually in their self-interest. And the way that we did it was to convince them that if you do that, it will lead to a virtuous cycle. You will incent and motivate your employees. And once we started doing that and started putting the numbers on the bottom line, it became a virtuous cycle. So you got to appeal to the self-interest, and it took us some time, but now I think we've got converts.
Great. We're going to open it up for questions. Sure. Feel free to introduce yourself if you would like.
My name is Muhammad from HSA Group, a family business in the Middle East. I just had a question. I think we're talking on the importance of private-public partnership, which is extremely important to face many of these crises today. But I think businesses today should also change of approach from short-termism to more long-termism. I mean, Deloitte, you work with a lot of businesses across the world. What are businesses doing to address long-term challenges rather than profit-driven, short-term reporting bottom lines?
Well, I would suggest to you that the pendulum has swung, and more businesses are focused on the longer term while still delivering short-term results, because that is what is expected of them. And it goes back to the point that I just made, is that people are realizing that doing good, taking care of your communities is good business. Addressing climate change, which is a societal, global issue, impacts everybody. So I think increasingly businesses are coming to that viewpoint. I'm quite optimistic about it. I'm also a realist, and I did suggest to you that running a private enterprise might actually, in this instance, be a little easier, because I do, by design, have a longer-term perspective. I don't have to report on a quarterly basis, so I do have an annual plan to meet. So, but I really do believe that a number of businesses, I'm going to be participating in the International Business Council, which has about 150 members, and many of them have been working collaboratively around climate issues, around issues on inequity, health equity. And so I think you mentioned you have 4,500 business partners, or
45,000.
45,000 business partners. I mean, they're partnering with United Way because it makes good business sense for them. And so I think increasingly, I think the pendulum has swung. Do you agree, Angela?
I agree. And I think one of the things that you said is so important is that inherently people do want to do good. And that is the motivator. And I think that an employee that, again, as you said, that sees how their business is giving back and then creates an atmosphere and a workplace that cares for them as individuals, but also their families and their neighborhoods, it does have a return. It's an intangible one, but I do think that it eventually does show up in the bottom line.
You know that COVID example that I gave you in India? When we surveyed 100,000 professionals that live in India, it was off the charts as to how proud they were of Deloitte. So we certainly did good. We impacted a positive outcome, but the intangible was the fact that 100,000 practitioners in India thought this was the greatest thing that we ever did.
I was going to ask you how people felt about that and how you're measuring impact, and obviously it's through retention and people feeling pride in their workplace. Any other questions? Sure.
I'm also with HSA Group, so I don't want to hog the floor too much, but HSA have an incredible tradition of philanthropy and going back more than 50 years. So they don't need convincing about this, but I think there are two challenges which make things more complicated. One is, I agree with you that creating a competition amongst businesses to do this and to show that it works is good, but because HSA is the largest Yemeni company, I think and so quite often we are the partner of choice, or we get involved with a lot of the COVID initiative in Yemen was done through us with the UN and other international private sector companies. There is a degree of jealousy and a feeling amongst other businesses that we are kind of the favored partner and we get preferential treatment, even to do good, sort of thing. Where sort of, so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that, and this came up in a meeting with one of the governments in the region, which is interested in helping Yemen. Their attitude was, actually, we deal with governments. We as a government who put a lot of money into Yemen, we have to deal with governments. Whereas, actually, I completely agree with you. The only way forward in Yemen, but across the board, is through partnerships, government, NGOs, UN, private sector, and so on. How do you persuade people that? So, and I think his concern is, it goes back to the first point. They're worried that going with a particular business will be seen as favoritism, or will it lead? Is there a sort of, are they getting involved with corruption or these sort of things? The reluctance about dealing with businesses, particularly in our part of the world, in the Middle East and so on. There's a little bit of a reluctance to deal with business because they worry about what they're going to get involved with. So how do you persuade people who need to deal with business, and how do you deal with other businesses to show them that actually this is a benefit for all, rather than somebody, Deloitte, I suppose it's a little bit like greening. There's a suspicion that companies are doing this for their own interest. Maybe there's that people worry that companies are doing it just for good publicity or something. How do you deal with those?
Well, listen, I'm not shy about the fact that there is self-interest involved in here. So there's no doubt about that. But over the last 8 years, I mean, when we started this purpose-driven journey, there was a little bit of competition, to your point. I mean, we wanted to be first. We wanted to be able to get the credit. But over the last 8 years, humility has come in. I mean, I realize that the problems are so many and so large that no single one entity can address them. So impacting women and girls, right, in India, I told you 175 million. There's ample opportunity for everybody to participate. Climate, COVID, come on in. And if we need to take a back seat so that we can have the right impact in our communities, I'm all for it. And I think what we're discovering is that on many of these issues, it will require all of us working together. All of us working together. Climate, I mean, I'm a big proponent of, we'll hear at WEF, all these great technologies that are going to come in. Green hydrogen, the real thing that we need to be focused on is nature-based solutions that will help us bridge where we are today and where these technologies will come in. These nature-based solutions are community by community. One of the things that we're working on in India is stubble burning. In my hometown, if you go in November in India, have you been to India?
Not yet.
Well, if you go in November, don't go, because Michelle's been, air quality is horrible.
Right.
Air quality is horrible because the farmers for eons have burnt the stubble. Now, to address air quality in northern India and to address stubble burning, we're certainly going to be able to do a little bit, but it'll require a whole bunch of entities to work together to address that. So with a little bit of humility and open arms, come on in, because the problem is so large that one entity, be it business, NGO, or government, cannot address it.
Angela, how do you deal with that in the nonprofit space? There are big nonprofits like United Way, and there are smaller ones that struggle and have to scramble for every dollar. And when people say, oh, well, they're partnering with the United Way again, kind of to his point, how do you think about that?
So the one thing about United Way Worldwide is not only do we perform programs, but we fund thousands of other nonprofits. So again, it's in partnership. It's not competition. And as Puneet said, it's going to take all of us to solve these problems. So we don't ever want to say we want to elbow people out. Absolutely not. That's why we can have 45,000 corporate partners. That's why we have tens of thousands of nonprofit partners as well. And so I do want to just thank Puneet. He is former board chair of United Way Worldwide, and Michelle Parmalee, who's here, who is currently serving on our board. And Deloitte is an example of really just being an incredible partner. And I would just say to all of you, being here at the World Economic Forum, the reason I am here is to continue to expand our partnerships and our relationships and to work with everyone here in community.
Any other questions?
Morning, Leon Groenewald here. I'd like to hear your learnings on continued mentorship in economic development. Our examples we find, whether that's community or business building, it becomes more complex as time progresses. So the process of hand-holding, and whether that's the NGO or the local communities, farmers in the vicinity, to practically help the new or communities that venture into this new space. What's your experience and advice on that, please?
So from an economic development standpoint, there are multiple facets that are involved. And I'll go back to the example I gave in Ghana, where United Way in Accra is working with a school system. It's a government school. And we helped the state library entity to build a library and stock it with books. We started a literacy program for young kids, and then the United Way staff provide other supports. So there's the early childhood education aspect of economic mobility. The second is where I described about in Kwamoso, the economic empowerment zone, where there was no entrepreneurship, no way for the women and girls to earn money. And just with $14,000, we're able to start and launch 3 businesses. And so now people from other villages come to buy their baked bread and cookies, or they come to buy beads, et cetera, and soap. And then another example I would say is in the United States, where we do reskilling, where people have lost jobs, or their jobs have become obsolete, or they want to learn something new, and giving them a pathway. We have what we call in the US prosperity centers, where people can come in and learn a new skill. And so there's just so many, that's such a complex issue. And again, it's community by community. And how can we take various aspects of that, collaborate together to do the work? Another example is in the healthcare system we're seeing, where we're losing healthcare workers. And I think that's true in Europe as well as in the US. I mean, COVID took its toll on healthcare workers. Now what do we do? How do we go about recruiting individuals to move into healthcare or to become community healthcare workers? Another example is with technology. And how are we connecting with colleges and universities or high schools even to allow kids of all backgrounds to learn and have a pathway into technology and getting hired?
Can I jump in on the reskilling thing and ask Puneet, what is your view on that? And in corporate America, we talk a lot about the need for a 4-year degree and how that's decreasing. And so I think while I have you here, I'm going to ask you what Deloitte's view on that is. And where you've done work in terms of reskilling and not needing, well, at least in the US, a pricey four-year degree to get started in a company like Deloitte?
Well, I think, you know, Angela started off the discussion by saying COVID changed everything, or there's, I don't know what the term you use.
New era.
A new era. I like that, actually. People use new normal, but new era. One of the things that COVID did bring was this great resignation and a real shortage of talent. And again, appealing to the self-interest of companies, companies have started realizing that skilling individuals or reskilling them is going to be important to bring them in with skills that are required that maybe a four-year college education doesn't provide, whether it is in technology or... So we are, again, on a community-by-community basis, focused on reskilling. The effort that I talked to you about, world-class in India, it provides skills to women and girls so that they can get jobs after they go through the program. We're collaborating with a number of NGOs in India, Pratham being one, and really improving the education process, bringing people in that would not have come in, and then improving the education process. One of the things, I'm going to make news here, one of the things that I'm going to do in my home state of Oregon, once you retire, the beautiful thing is that you can actually do anything that you want. It's a blank canvas. And I'm going to give back to the state of Oregon, and I'm going to work with the governor of Oregon, with the state senator, with the community college, and with business to try and get individuals that would not go out and get the training, to get the training in the state of Oregon, build a talent pool, attract businesses, and get them jobs. Now, this sounds great. It may fall flat on its face, but I'm going to definitely give it a good try.
Okay. Thank you for the scoop and allowing me the aside. We'll go back to questions.
Thank you so much. Liz Weaver, I'm with an organization called Tamarack, and we are a collective social innovation recipient today. The couple of questions. Well, one kind of statement and a question. I heard in your examples implied, but not directly, the importance of the voice of people with lived and living experience. So I think both of you gave lots of good examples, and you talked about private, philanthropic, and nonprofit partnerships. But I also think a critical factor is people with lived and living experience. Because if we truly want to create solutions, we want to create solutions that work for them, right? Not solutions that come in our brains. It's really about that kind of four-sector engagement. And I heard it, but I didn't hear it, so I wanted to...
And thank you for putting a fine point on it, because that is absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I heard it. So, but I wanted to bring it up. And then I guess the second question or the question that I have is rebuilding communities for the long haul. We know that we have these poly-crises. They're coming at us fast, and they are coming at us with a great deal of complexity. I wonder about this approach, and I think I've also heard this from you all, but how about this approach about making small bets before we make big bets? And so I love the idea of Deloitte taking on, you know, the engagement of women and girls in India, but what's the small bets that you're doing right now before you take on that big audacious goal? And so how do we navigate and how do we rebuild our communities in a way that we're able to do both small bets and have this big goal that we're setting for? And what do you do at the United Way, and what do you do at Deloitte that enables that kind of prototyping for purposeful action?
Every example that I gave you started as a pilot. So the stubble burning example that I gave you started in 2 villages in a particular district, and we proved the concept out. We learned from it. We made some mistakes. How do you interact with farmers? How do you build the app so that not a highly educated individual can use it? How do you get equipment manufacturers to be incented to go take the stubble? Where does the stubble go? So we learned it through the pilots before we go on and make a bigger bet. So we're all for making those small bets. Even You know, it's easy now. We started the world-class program in 2017. Today, 5 years later, 6 years later, I can say we're making a bet for 50 million women and girls. We started small. Particularly if you are using your own money or your partner's money, you have to start small to be able to prove to them that what you're talking about doesn't just sound good, it is something that can actually lead to tangible outcomes.
And I want to thank you for your question. I'm going to take a systems approach to respond to your question. So you talked about the long haul, and then Kimberly had asked us a question about the playbook, and I've been talking about this new era. One of the things that I've been talking about at United Way Worldwide is how do we build community resilience? And when we create a system, because I don't think it exists now, that enables resilience, a playbook in which a community knows now, no matter what the crisis is, this is how we engage the community. This is how we engage the individuals with the lived experience. This is how we engage the government. This is how we engage our corporate partners. And this is how we get to a table to create solutions. And so in this new era, it's not, as you've mentioned, it's not the top down. It's not, I'm coming in to be your savior community. Rather, I'm coming in to partner with you and to make sure that we are creating an equitable table that honors all of the voices and perspectives and lived experiences to have the conversation that yields a creative solution.
Question about the equitable table. How do you even get to explaining that the table is equitable when it's been inequitable for so long?
So that's a great question. I have been radically thinking in my head, and probably people would just shiver when they hear this, but I feel like our systems, whether it's healthcare, education, were created, decades ago, a century ago, with certain intentions or value systems in mind, which included excluding certain populations. So when we talk about tweaking healthcare, or we talk about tweaking education, all we're doing is tweaking a system that was created on values that were intentionally discounting certain parts of the population. So why not blow those systems up and create something new? That's radical. Can we do that? Or can we, again, starting small with small bets and then go to those big, hairy, audacious goals? But I do say, especially healthcare, COVID showed it, education, COVID showed it, we have some disparities, and it's in all countries, and we have to address it, but it's not about tweaking the edges. It's about bold, radical steps to create these new systems and these new templates and the ways that we engage with each other as human beings.
I love Angela, and I think she is absolutely wonderful, but I don't agree with her on that particular point. I mean, the point that I agree with her on is that
I did say people would shiver when I said it.
But I do agree with her that we need to come up with an audacious goal. So let's take climate, the fact that we've got to get our increase in temperatures down by a certain point was an audacious goal. But I think we need to, rather than blow systems up, we need to get everybody involved towards a radical goal, as Angela is saying. But I think we need to get everybody involved on that journey. And we also need to recognize that some of this is going to take effort and it's going to take time.
So Puneet, how do we get the people that are in control of systems to be willing to change? Because we're talking about a power shift or a perceived power shift.
Well, let's take climate for instance. I mean, the goal of the Paris Agreement, which laid out very clearly as to what needs to get done, it's been a hard lift, but increasingly business is coming on board because they realize that it is in their self-interest to come on board. It's doing good, but it is also good business. And the transition is going to take some time. We will have 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back. But if he had decided to come up with that audacious goal and said, we're going to blow everything up, and change the rules of the game, I don't think we would have had people participate.
How do you get the table to be more equitable?
Well, I think we have to set audacious goals. I agree with Angela. So as an example, it is unacceptable that there is such income inequality in the world. That there are people, I include myself in there, that have a level of wealth that, I mean, there has to be more equality. I think we need to set an audacious goal in terms of what the future looks like. And then we need to, within the system, work towards that goal, just like we're trying to do with climate.
So can I also, Puneet, dig in a little bit more? So
Well, now we have a lively debate.
No, I think this is great. I think this is great. We need to talk about it. We need to absolutely talk.
So when I said that radical thing about blowing up systems, so how about let's have these uncomfortable conversations? How about let's do things that we don't ever do? For example, when it comes to healthcare, or let me use NASDAQ as an example. So what NASDAQ did was saying, we want you, companies that are reported on our exchange, to have women on boards. Now, how radical is that? That's like launching something into the ethosphere to start changing. Because when you then mandate, we want you to report that you have women on your boards, that changes the dynamic in the conversations in the boardroom. Again, that changes perspectives. And so those are examples in my mind of ways in which businesses can do things differently. Why not have people of color on boards or in leadership positions? When you look at WEF, I attended the women's reception last night. The women were celebrating that we're finally at 20-something% women attending WEF. Okay. And that's a decrease from prior years. But what population do we make up? I'm just saying.
No, we agree on that.
Okay.
You and I are absolutely on the right.
But so how do we disrupt business, even in leadership, in systems of mentoring and engaging different folks to be able to have a seat at the table, to exercise power at the table, to be respected?
Inclusion.
Inclusion.
Yeah. No, but I agree. But I think setting those audacious goals are absolute. I'm completely on board with that. But when people say that we should blow up the system or radically change the system, I want to understand what that actually means. So if you want to set, I think Angela is absolutely right. I fully subscribe to this. We should have gender equity in boardrooms, in senior executive positions, in partnership at Deloitte. We should absolutely have more equality when it comes to income. But I don't fully comprehend what it means to radically change the system. That's setting a radical goal, just like the example that I gave you with climate. Absolutely, we should do that.
So, Angela, using your board example, do you fire the entire board and then bring in a new board? Is that your example of blowing? To play devil's advocate here, is that the example?
I do not want to disrupt WEF. Go on record and say, fire your board to start over. But I do think, again, I am being provocative, but I'm also very, very serious in that there has to be the various lenses, and there has to be this different mindset and perspective. And there's a phrase that I always use, that iron sharpens iron. So when you and I come to the table and we have different viewpoints, we disagree with each other, we can, in that give and take, come to a better outcome. And that's what I want to see more of. And I don't see that. What I hear is too many people saying the same thing or saying the same thing or behaving in the same manner. And again, that's based on this exclusion of a group of people that don't have the opportunity to be in the room, or in our case, in the dome.
You know, we talk about income inequality as an example. I'm all for the estate tax. It should be a global mandate that anybody above a certain income level, when they pass away, they can't pass that income on to their kids. Their kids have to work.
No, that's radical.
Well, but that is, there are ways in which you can impact inequality without blowing up the system.
then how do you close the wealth gap in certain communities?
Well, I think by providing opportunity. We've talked about the fact that we have to work community by community by providing education and skilling and addressing issues. But, you know, things like the estate tax, I'm a big proponent of that. I think all of us that are fortunate enough to have done well should not be able to pass it down.
Any final questions?
I actually do think there's something in between the two of you. So in order to change things and fundamentally change things, we have to change, right? And so when we were, some of the work we do at Tamarack is ending poverty. So not poor who are better off, but net less poor in Canada. That's our big audacious goal. And in order to do that, we said, you know, around these community-based roundtables, you need people with the lived experience of poverty, individuals from government, from the voluntary sector, and from the private sector. And in my community, it was 10 people with the lived experience of poverty, 10 private sector, 10 government sector, 10 nonprofits. And what was really interesting as that evolved was that business and people with the lived experience of poverty lined up together because they were looking for quick wins and quick solutions. That's what business does, that's what they're oriented towards, but the people with lived experience of poverty also articulated that. Government and nonprofit sectors are really good at process, right? We like to talk, we like to engage with one another, we like to pull the problem apart. So it is, you know, changing the way that we think about the world, looking at the patterns that emerge when you have different kinds of conversations with different kinds of stakeholders. And then I think it is really trying to understand how can we live in this tension of process and product, right? So we need to have a new way of working together, but we also have to keep our eye on the prize, the net less poor in our community or whatever we're working towards, right? And so I think that that's the value of shifting the dynamics and shifting not just individual representation, but radically shifting how many people around these tables and how we support them differently to engage in that really deep dialogue about the complexity of the problem. That, for me, is kind of the middle point, not totally exploding everything, but really saying, hey, we could do things differently, and we could do things better to get to better outcomes.
Okay.
Just one more.
One more.
Quickly.
Quickly.
Good morning. My name is Glenn, and I'm from Flex, a manufacturing company. Now, you did mention a lot about being at the community level. It makes perfect sense. Now, one of the other pieces of the equation is the public piece, right? What should governments do, and so on and so forth. Now, in a lot of the places where you go give help, you know that they are all developing markets, primarily emerging markets. You deal with a lot of corruption. You deal with a lot of self-interest around power struggles. How do you all maneuver around that? What's your thought around it? Because unless that changes, a lot of the help that you give is likely going to be at the local community level, as opposed to being it a little bit more systematic, if I might use that term.
We operate in 150 countries. We have one set of values. We absolutely do not engage in any of that type of behavior. We just don't engage. Any NGO that we work with has to adhere to Deloitte's standard when it comes to anti-corruption, and so we just strictly adhere to it in the way that we do business, in the way that we give money, in the way that we engage with our people. And what is interesting is, in many of these countries that you're alluding to, they realize that it's a lost cause, because if we find somebody within our organization even remotely associated with that, they will not have a job at Deloitte. There is no gray area. We just don't engage.
Anything, right? Okay. Did you have anything to add on that?
Oh, I would just say, I agree with Puneet, and same for us, but you're right. That means staying very, very local. But there's still opportunities, and we've seen that in the countries that we've operated, where we're able to to broaden based on having great partners that have the same values that are aligned with ours.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, I want to thank our panelists, Puneet and Angela. Thank you very much for a lively discussion. I thank the in-person audience and everyone watching virtually. Enjoy your sessions. Enjoy your WEF. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.